And welcome back to Pastor Plek's podcast. I am your host, Pastor Plek, and I am so excited to be recording live here from Austin, Texas. Welcome all our live stream audiences that are watching around the globe, all the ones and twos of you and different platforms. We're pretty pumped about it. And with me in studio today is none other than the engaged and lovely Laura Allen. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So
excited to be here.
Yeah, excited. She's actually engaged to our pastoral intern, Jacob Lawlden. Are you excited about that?
I am.
It's very good. Very good. How'd that engagement go?
It was great.
So how did he ask you?
So a long time ago on our first date, we went to Lucky Robot.
Lucky Robot, is that like coffee shop?
In Austin, it's a sushi place on South Congress.
Oh, yes. Okay, I know it, yes.
So he was like, we should just go to dinner on Saturday. And I was like, okay, cool. And then I had a long day. I was nannying and I was like, I feel gross. I'm going to get so nice for this date. And I didn't put makeup on in probably like a month. And that's how it felt, at least. And I looked at my roommates, and the night before, he had tried to like organize my roommates taking me out to get our nails done, and I ran out of gas, which like if any of my friends listen to this, they're gonna be like, yeah, that checks out. Like,
you run out of gas?
Not regularly, but things like that happen in my life. Just like I ran out of gas because I didn't fill it up the night before. And then a like nice lady came by and took me to the gas station to get a gallon of gas. And that's happened before. Like my friends lost me in Big Bend and I got in someone's car and like he returned me to the visitor center. But other people said that that's not safe. But what happened is we got into a conversation about evangelism in the car. She's a believer. Jesus turned her whole life around and we ended up bonding. She goes to Austin Life. And so my take was like, this was a blessing. And Jacob was like, hey, maybe don't get in strangers' cars though. So that's to be determined.
She looked like, did you use the Holy Spirit discernment to know?
She had a cross hanging from her, her mirror. So I figured I'd ask. Yeah. But I didn't make it to getting our nails done. And so they were kind of panicking that I wouldn't. But I did anyways. And then Saturday he showed up to my house with a lot of roses and I had gotten all dressed and I was like, that hasn't happened before. Why do you have those? and then we went to dinner and he was like, we're going to go to Lucky Robot. I was like, that's interesting. That was like our first date. And then,
well, at least he remembered it was his first.
No,
a
lot of details that I was like, And then we ended up, this was a complete accident, but sitting at the exact same table. And I thought that was on purpose. I was like, wow, that was so sweet. And he was like, that just kind of worked out. And I was like, that's really cool. And we were also matching like white tops and like black pants. And that was weird. And yeah, then
maybe it was planned and you just didn't know it.
Maybe
it's inception.
Maybe it was.
All right, so then what
like
happened?
Grander sense.
Did you like put drink your soda or your water or whatever, or it was in your sushi and you pulled up and you ate a ring?
No, yeah, I wish it was at the bottom of my water. No, we drank our water, ate our sushi, and then he was kind of like reflecting on our past few like years on our relationship together, and I was like, okay. I feel like we're going through memory lane for a reason, but I don't know.
Was it like, hey, do you remember that one time? That was cool.
It was deeper than that, but a little bit of that too. Like, hey, remember that one time that we ate here? And then it would go into like something deeper. And then I was kind of like, is he going to do it here? Because he was like acting kind of shifty. And I was like, And then he was like, we should go for a walk on the boardwalk, like in Austin.
Nice.
And that's like my favorite place ever. I spent so much time when I first moved here running around the lake and I love it there. And so I was like, okay, a walk at my favorite place. Maybe a coincidence. And then we pulled up and I was in heels. And so we walked through the mud a little bit.
Nice.
And I was like, okay, still nice, still great. And then we stopped by, probably not my favorite part of the whole thing, but it's just funny that we stopped by like we stopped at a spot and he was like standing next to me real awkwardly, like, look at the scenery. But the scenery was a paddleboarding class, like of people in their swimsuits and this like teenage girls like, okay, when we get out there, we're gonna like paddle, paddle, paddle. And we were just like reflecting, looking at them. And I was like, this is odd. But he shared later that was supposed to be the spot. And so he was panicking in his head. He was like, what do I do now? Like, this was the spot. And his sisters and their boyfriends were like hiding in the bushes to take photos. And so he was like trying to communicate to them, like, what do we do? And then
it was like, man, this is so beautiful. I don't want this paddleboard to be in our way as we're just looking at the stream.
Yeah, which I do appreciate that he didn't drop on one knee at the paddleboard people. But then we moved farther out to the boardwalk and we were looking at downtown Austin, and then he popped a knee real quick. And yeah.
So there it is. The rest is history.
There it is.
All right. So wedding date to follow. You'll let us know.
To be determined.
All right. Awesome. All right. So let's recap from the sermon that was so moving that you couldn't take notes. You were so enthralled in the talk.
Yes.
Yeah. It was so amazing.
That was it.
Yeah. So we're going through the book of Exodus, and Exodus, if you didn't know, it's a Greek word, which is hodos, means way, ex means out. So way out. And in Greek. But the weird thing that I learned as I studied this is that the book of Exodus is not the book of Exodus in Hebrew. It's actually the Shemot, which is just another word for saying the names. Isn't that kind of interesting? Mm-hmm. So the reason is the first verse of Exodus says, these are the names. And is kind of like you sitting down at that table. It was the table that you were supposed to be sitting at, but it was completely random. Or was it?
Yeah, I don't think it was.
So God did the same thing with this.
Same God.
Same God did the same thing with the book, and he called it the names, and that's going to be important. So he lists out the sons of Jacob or Israel, and then we learn about what happens is that all the children of all these men are turned into slaves within about a generation of Joseph. So Joseph was there and reigned about 30 years or so. And then he dies, and then everyone forgets. And then that's when the the Pharaoh goes, these Hebrews are getting out of control. And the thing that I learned also is that the Egyptians were super racist. Like, think about your most racist person. They were worse than that. They thought it was despicable, detestable to even eat with such a person. In fact, when the prime minister, AKA Joseph, who was like a father to Pharaoh in his day, he was not allowed to eat at the table with Egyptians because they were beneath them. So sort of wild, isn't that? Mm-hmm. So anyway, what is interesting is that but they're not so racist that they can't have them work among them. They just can't assimilate. Because if I were Egypt, and maybe this is just the American in me, I would just take all these people and just start assimilating and trying to get culture spread out, and we could have one large people group and it's all the Egyptians. But they did not mix, and it was on their end. And so the Jewish people are just sort of hanging out in the land of Goshen, tending sheep, another thing that was despicable or distasteful for the Egyptians. And that's when Pharaoh gets this decision. He's like, listen, these people are out of control and they're growing really, really strong. I've got an idea. We need to put them in slavery. Mm. And the reason this is so great, come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. So verse 10 was a worry that they would escape, which is so weird to me. If you really hated these people that much, or if you really thought they were that gross, why would you not just send them home? Like, hey, you guys have to move out, right? I mean, wouldn't that be the best answer? But God obviously had a reason for that, is he was like, I would call Egypt the incubator for a nation. So birthed out of this nation of Egypt was a nation of 2.5 million people, and then it just grew and grew. Now, one of the things I thought was interesting, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that whenever you look at the story of their affliction, you would think that if it's God's people, why would God afflict them for 400 years? I mean, why would he put them in slavery for 400 years? Was that a question you were asking?
It wasn't, but that's a great question.
Let me ask that question for you. Because why, if you're God, do you start your people out in the worst set of circumstances? And you may not know this, but it actually comes from Genesis chapter 15. Here's a wild thought. All right, so Genesis 15, you guys remember this? Abram, before he was Abraham, just in case you didn't know, Abram means father of a nation. Abra, father, a people or a nation. There you go. Abraham, or Abraham, as we say it, Abraham. That's father when you put another A in there, that makes it many nations. So Abraham, or Abraham is father of many nations. There you go. So whenever Abram meets God and God tells him, hey, look up at the stars, count them if you can. And Abram's like, it's a lot. And then God says, that is how your offspring are going to be. And he's like, well, how can that be if, my servant Eleazar is going to inherit all of my stuff and I have no son and I've got no heir. And he's like, no, it's going to be like that. And he makes a covenant with him. And part of the covenant was this: know for certain that your offspring, the millions of people that you have, will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, aka Egypt, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions, which is a wild prophecy. And the thing about this that made it even crazier, and they shall come back here in the fourth generation. And here's the reason. This to me was like, if I were a Jewish person that was a slave, this part would frustrate me. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. You have to be a slave for 400 years because these people aren't done doing evil. That expression is a great, what are you thinking about when you hear that? Like, this is the part where you're like, I don't know if I like God on that. What's going on here?
Yeah, I love reading the Old Testament and like same God, but learning about God from the Old Testament.
Yeah, it's wild. It's like, why would you need to do it? Now,
Whoa.
Obviously he's God, he's in complete control, but there's several things going on here. And this, I think, relates to us. In your suffering, I don't know if you've ever suffered before. Have you ever suffered?
Lots and lots.
And in your suffering, there's moments and times where you're like, there's got to be a reason for this. I just can't see it. And there was a reason for the suffering. God's justice would be meted out not only on Egypt, because they would afflict them not righteously, but also on the Amorites who were doing great evil. And many say that the term Amorites here is synecdoche, which I know that everybody has their dictionary ready to know what that means. That means exchange the part for the whole. So there wasn't just the Amorites. There was like the Girgashites, the Hibusites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, all the sites are there. And so the Amorites might be a part for the whole. But remember, this is where sometimes people, they kind of get angry at God for like condoning or conducting genocide, but God is free to do whatever he wants. He is the objective judge. And when he wants to punish one nation using another nation to do it, he's all welcome to do it. And so you have no idea how God is operating. We just got a, kind of like backstage passes to God's boardroom meeting, and you're just sitting there when he's like, all right, so 400 years of slavery, that'll work out nicely because that'll make sure the sin wraps up for the Amorites. And the Amorites actually attack the Israelites as they're leaving Israel, and they start killing off all the weak and the elderly, and then God judges them and the Israelites take them out. So that's a fun story. But what was really powerful for me, just as a Christian in everyday life, living here in Austin, Texas, is that when you are experiencing suffering, God has a plan. God does not waste a hurt, which means, Laura, for all the suffering that you have, like when we've talked about suffering that you've experienced, everyone's got their own small T traumas if they don't have big T traumas. Like you've got all your issues. I've had my issues. And for me, one of the things that was really beautiful is that when I was, 22, 23, I was like crying out to God, God, why am I so lonely? I remember just screaming that in the house once. I was just like alone in a house. And it was weird, right? And if I were to met my wife that time, she would have been in middle school, and that probably wouldn't have gone over very well, right? I mean, like, that's weird. And so I had to wait until the right time. And plus,
God knew that she was in middle school. You didn't. And it felt
it would have been great for the
suffering
heads
at
up.
time.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
that would have been helpful. It would have been great for like an oracle to show up and be like, by the way, your wife is in middle school. Don't worry about it. That would have been helpful, but I didn't get that. But it's been awesome to see how great my wife is and how immature I was. I would have been an awful husband during those years. And so I think that the Lord spared me from being, one, a cruddy husband, and two, marrying not the one I was supposed to marry. So I'm so grateful. And this goes back into the ultimate question that young adults ask all the time. How will I know who I'm supposed to marry? Laura.
Wow, I have that at 25. I'm going to give everybody that answer.
I would love to hear what you think. Ready, go.
I would say that what you said does make me think of Jacob and I, because we've had this conversation of like, during college, I was really confused why, I don't know, like, yeah, God, why have you forsaken me? Why is my life going like this? Like, I had boyfriends that I thought I was going to marry. I was crushed over. I even moved here, not really ever grieving those relationships, just like bitter. And my heart was hard towards it and towards God over it. It was just like, maybe I got something wrong. Maybe God got something wrong, like kind of the audacity there. But I wasn't walking closely with Christ. And honestly, I wasn't really suffering well. And I didn't know what was here for me in Austin. Like, I hadn't really lost things for the name of Christ. Like, I hadn't experienced what I needed to experience. And then when I talked to Jacob, our years of partying are the exact same years. Our years of like not acknowledging God for who he is and like fully following him are the exact same. So
didn't you guys like go to high school together?
Yeah, we went to high school together.
In Atlanta?
In Atlanta. And we both end up in Austin going through recovery and following Jesus blindly and ending up in communities. And at the same time, like the same day, which is like one of my favorite parts of our story, is the same day, February 2021, we found like in old journals, like he felt the Lord calling him and kind of giving him a vision in prayer. And I like wrote down that like my heart was just like the Lord was like, take seriously what I've put like in you, no matter what, just like follow me all in. Like, was reading Paul's letters and was like, oh my gosh, a slave to Christ. This is like, instead of a slave to sin, it just all made sense.
But it all comes together.
Yeah, but it was the same day in February, and he was in Atlanta and I was in Austin. And then a mutual friend from high school told him he should like hit me up. She didn't know what I was going through. She didn't know what he was going through, but she was like, I think there's someone from our high school in Austin. And then we both end up really learning what Christian community looks like, but at separate churches, and like discipleship and community and accountability and all these things at separate churches at the same time. So we're kind of like, we'll meet up at dinner, or we'll meet up at a coffee shop, or we'll meet up and just talk evangelism and talk Jesus and have these conversations that no one else our age really or around us felt like they were having.
That's awesome. Yeah. So here's how you're going to know who the one is. Are you guys ready? Is everyone writing this down? You'll know the one you're supposed to marry after you say, I do. Huh?
Hate to hear it.
Huh? No, that's the truth, though. I know you want to know sooner. You'll know after you say I do, and then you'll be able to go back and sort of piece it all together, just like you're doing now. It's really kind of cool how God works. And I'm grateful that he works like that, because I think if I were to know certain things, I wouldn't have, the mistakes I've made me into the person I've been. Now, there's a lot of people I've hurt that I would like to go back and unhurt, but thankfully Jesus is still on the throne, and he can make it a lot really right in many ways, which is really cool. All right, so let's talk about the two people that are named, because it's the book of names. Mm-hmm. And in chapter 1, you have, Jacob, and you've got all the sons, and you've got Joseph, and then you've got random people that are not given names. But then, and even the king of Egypt doesn't get a name. But then we get to these Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other was named Puah. So if you're looking for some great female names for some daughters coming up, Shiphrah and Puah are available. And when you serve as a midwife to the Hebrew women, if you see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, kill him. So that's the Pharaoh gives these two ladies an assassin's like job. Go and murder babies. And they are like, they don't say no. They're like, all right, sounds good, roger that. And then they go out, but because they feared God, they did not do as the king commanded them. But they let the male children live. Now, here's what happened. When I talk about this, people usually go, but didn't they sin by lying? And whenever I think about that, I'm like, well, you guys have heard the 10 Commandments, right? 10 Commandments. Let's go. Number 1 is there, you shall have no other gods before you. 2, don't make any graven images. 3, don't take the Lord's name in vain. 4, keep the Sabbath day holy. 5, honor your mom and dad. 6, don't murder anybody. 7, don't commit adultery. Number 8, don't steal. 9, don't lie. 10, don't covet. All right, how'd I do? How'd I do it? Anyone look those up? Anyway, so
sounds right.
Sounds about right. Anyway, so when do you get the legislation of the law? You get it. Obviously, we're in Exodus 1, and we get the 10 Commandments way beyond that in like Exodus 19-ish or beyond that. And what that means is you are a slave to sin, kind of like you were talking about. You're a slave to sin until God's exodus, until God's freedom for your life then gives you the law. Well, what law did the midwives have? They had don't murder. So if you were to go to Noah, let's see if I can find that. So I think it's in Genesis 9. Noah is given, do not, anyone who kills will be from their own life, from their own body, their blood will be demanded of them. And so that's that's what they have. That was the last order or command of God. Don't kill anybody, which is sort of interesting to think about. Now, for God's people, that they did get circumcised, that was sort of a big deal for a while, and then there was a period of time where they didn't. But that was sort of a wild thing. Like, how in the world would you even know that? In fact, this is where with Rahab did not have God's law. Remember Rahab also, whenever the Battle of Jericho went on, she took the spies and then she lies to the Jericho police. And they're like, hey, did you see any spies? I haven't seen them. They went that way. She's flat out lies, sends them in a different direction, but she at that point feared God, but had no other law. So this is where I think God's laws are written on your heart, right? But this, the specific revelation here of like the right thing to do in this situation was to fear God, honor God's people, take care of God's people, and however you need to accomplish that, that's what it took. So I just want to bring that up because I think people they spend probably way too much time debating about the fact that they lied or not. And it doesn't matter because that wasn't what had God revealed yet as wrong. They were protecting life, and that was what was right. Any thoughts on that, Laura?
Yeah, I think fearing God above all things, and now like that Christ came, died, rose again, we have the Holy Spirit. I think even bringing that to modern day, like that was something that I thought about, prayed on, saw in my own life of, okay, are you going to listen to other people or more law-like, more Pharisee-like things, or are you listening to the Holy Spirit? Are you fearing God more as your personal relationship Christ over? You can respect and honor other people and other Christians, but at the end of the day, like, is that against what like God is telling you?
And this is where we talked about this in a previous podcast. We're talking about Romans 14. What might be convicting you as sin might not be convicting something else. That might be a thing of personal conviction. Yeah. One of the things we talked about is that these midwives made a huge sacrifice on behalf of families. And that's a big deal because we know that they didn't have families. And the reason why we know that is their reward for saving the lives of these babies was they were given families of their own. So these midwives, and these aren't just like, 15-year-olds. No, these were old enough. These were ladies that were old enough to report to Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh gives them the command, go and kill. And they're like, all right, they go, they don't do it. They let them live. And they are given families. So what we know is that they were barren women, and in that culture, at best you were seen as not blessed, and at worst you were seen as having a curse. And so what that meant for them is that they would have all these experiences of saving lives, putting babies into the arms of a mom, taking a baby, making sure that they were protected. And their whole life, it was about giving to someone the very thing that they had been denied. And you want to talk about suffering, like as a person where you are every day, your job reminds you of what you don't have. Here's a baby that you don't have, and I'm going to go and deliver this baby to this family. And so you've got to know that that was a painful experience. One of the things that I shared on Sunday was Liz Mitchell, who is our deacon of care, and we love Liz. She's a really special person. She coordinates a lot of meal trains for our church. Especially for new moms that are struggling, single moms. She's the do-it-all woman for a lot of ladies at our church and beyond. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's really beautiful about that is she hasn't been able to get pregnant, and then at the same time she's been denied through her and Jeff have been denied through fostering to adopt several times. It's like whether they were denied or the fostering agency fell through, and it just feels like she just gets put on repeat on this pain of being reminded that the very thing that she feels like God has called her to do, to have a baby, whether it's a bio baby or an adoptive baby, she doesn't care. She just wants someone to love and take care of. That's what God has put on her heart. And so when you watch Liz struggle with that, it just sort of breaks your heart as she is just an ungodly woman. But that's the kind of women that Shiphrah and Puah, where they were putting other people's good ahead of their own, so that God saw fit to reward them. And one of the things I want all of us to do right now is I want us to pray for Liz Mitchell. We're going to pray for Liz and Jeff that they would get pregnant and ask God to do a huge blessing. They don't mind me sharing this, which I'm grateful for, but it's a big deal. And when you put somebody else's need like that out there, it's wild. And I want to watch God move. I want to see God work in a really cool way. So would you mind joining me in prayer for them?
I would love to.
God, I'm so grateful for you. I pray that you would help Liz have a baby. God, whether that's her own biological baby, whether it's a foster baby, whatever kind of baby that is, Lord, I pray that we could come back here on the show and just show the world that you are faithful. And I know it's a scary thing to pray things that I don't have knowledge of. If in the end you're going to hear. I know you always hear, but I don't know if you're going to answer in a way that I would want. But God, I know that you're good, and I know that you're just, and all things work for the good of those who love you and are called according to your purpose. And I know Liz is. So Lord, would you please honor this prayer request? If I have any favor in your eyes, would you please, 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 God, would you hear our prayer and give her a baby? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Mm-hmm. We don't do that all the time, but every now and then, I think there's a proper time and place to be praying for people that are in a place like that. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts from Exodus 1 on what God's doing on missing out? The whole thought was at the very beginning was like, I think we miss out on God working our lives. When success is our own doing, when suffering, we see success as God's absence, or we see submission to God as inconsequential. And I think all three of those, success, suffering, submission, are all part of God's role in redemptive history for us, for people then, and for us now.
Yeah, I just wanted to shout out Liz again. She's an amazing person. And before I was even coming to your church, Liz basically was my supporter going through recovery. Like, she didn't need to care for me like that, and did. And she just stepped into a nurturing role in my life spiritually, and love Jeff too. And it's been so encouraging to watch
they're the
their
real
faithfulness.
Deal. Man.
But when it comes to what you said about success, and even you sharing more about your own struggles with that, of sometimes seeing it like, oh, I've done this. And yeah, I can relate a lot to that in a painful way. I was like, why do you say that? Because no matter how many times, and then I'll read in the Bible when everybody forgets God. And I'm like, how could you ever do that? Yeah. And then I'm like, I built this for myself. I got here on my own. Mm-hmm. I'm like, what are you talking about? Remember when you were on the ground praying, weeping and praying and all these things.
I have that problem of pray it and forget it. It's just like, oh yeah, I prayed that thing that one time.
Yeah.
Oh, God did do that. Mm-hmm. Oh, he is real. He does come through. And I'm a pastor, and I still have that struggle. So I can imagine a lot of people, there's this part of like, you've got to be able to see God working. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it.
Mm-hmm. And I had another amazing woman in my life, Sandy Gillum, if you're listening, remember to tell me when I was first a conviction for me was to stop drinking alcohol. And when that first happened, she was like, remember like the importance of stones of remembrance and in the Old Testament, and do that in your own life, which is still something I forget to do. But there's been so many miraculous things in the last few years that I prayed for the kinds of things that I would never, ever, ever be able to forget. And one for me was like my body wasn't healed. And then I got my healing. And that was one thing that was just like a great stone of remembrance. Even when I'm like, I got myself here. It's, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
So
it's good. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, we love questions. If you want to, you could just write in a question in the chat comments below, or you can send a text to 737-231-0605. We would love to hear from you. We talk faith, culture, everything in between. So let us know. Drop a link in if you want to find out where and when. I think pretty much this is going to be an open wedding with like an open bar, I think, for Jacob and Laura. So I'm sure they're going to invite the whole world.
Two sober people. It's open bar. I mean, it's a party for the others.
Yeah, it's a party for everybody else. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, listen, we would love to have your questions. We talk faith, culture, everything in between. So from our house to yours, have an awesome week of worship.